Have you ever, looked at your endless to-do list or just felt that constant pressure of long work hours and thought, there just has to be a better way?
Mhm.
What if the whole idea of work as we know it, those traditional long weeks, is maybe fundamentally flawed?
Right.
And what if AI, what if automation weren't just about, say, cutting jobs or costs, but about really rethinking how we spend our time?
Okay.
Like, what if they could actually cut down our working week quite a bit? While, and this is the really key part, keeping our pay exactly the same.
That sounds pretty radical.
It sounds almost utopian, doesn't it? It's maybe a bit too good to be true.
Yeah.
But the sources we're looking at today, they don't just pitch this as some fantasy.
Mm.
They actually lay out a vision that they argue is, well, both feasible and pretty urgent.
Exactly. And that's really what this deep dive is all about, exploring a practical vision for using AI to reform work-life balance.
Right.
We're looking at how this technology, which, let's face it, often makes people anxious about their jobs,
Yeah, definitely.
could actually be used for, well, for human flourishing. Our mission here is to unpack the evidence, look at the actual proposals that suggest this isn't just wishful thinking and a tangible possibility, something we could actually do.
So if you've ever felt that, relentless squeeze of endless work days or just wondered if there's a smarter, more balanced way to live and work, this deep dive is definitely for you. We're going to unpack this fascinating idea, drawing from some really compelling sources that paint a surprisingly optimistic yet data-driven picture. Okay, so as we started digging into these sources, one of the things that really jumped out was this sense of a profound, almost hidden crisis lurking just beneath the surface of our modern work lives.
Yeah.
A crisis of health and actually of productivity, too.
It's a stark reality, yeah. Long hours aren't just tiring, they're demonstrably dangerous.
How so?
Well, globally, working 55 or more hours a week is tragically linked to 745,000 deaths from stroke and heart disease every single year.
Wow, it's
Yeah.
huge.
It is. And bringing it closer to home, here in the UK, we see around 440,000 workers reporting work-related stress annually. That leads to about 10 million lost workdays.
10 million days.
Yeah. And the cost to businesses, it's equally stark. An estimated £28 billion lost just last year. That's due to stress, burnout, accounting for 23 million sick days overall.
Good grief.
And look, here's a really striking example of just how intense it can get. NHS 999 call handlers. They average 33 sick days per year.
33.
33, that's 8 times the national average. And what's truly fascinating here is how our current work culture, despite aiming for productivity by making people work longer.
Right, more hours equals more output, supposedly.
Exactly. But it often achieves the opposite. Those traditional 37 to 40-hour weeks, often stretched even further by overtime, they create this illusion of efficiency. But in reality, they're driving burnout, poor health, and, frankly, diminishing returns. Productivity often tails off.
That really does make you wonder if our whole approach to work time is just fundamentally backward. So this idea then, shorter work week, same pay. I mean, a lot of listeners might be thinking, okay, sounds nice, but is this just a fantasy?
Right. Is it just wishful thinking?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do our sources say about the real-world evidence? Has this actually been tried? Does it work?
Well, the evidence is actually pretty compelling, and it comes from different places. Look at the UK 4-day-week pilot back in 2022.
Okay, I remember hearing about that.
Right. It was quite large scale. 61 companies, about 2,900 employees. They all worked 20% fewer hours, so basically a 4-day week for the same pay.
And the results?
The results were genuinely dramatic. A 71% reduction in reported burnout.
71%.
Yeah. 39% lower stress levels, 65% fewer sick days taken, and a really big one for businesses, a 57% drop in staff turnover.
Okay, that turnover stat alone is huge for costs. But what about productivity? That's okay. 1.4% might not sound like a revolution, but improving productivity while working less. That really challenges the basic assumption, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
I mean, personally, I know my focus just tanks after a certain point in a long day. Are we just kind of performing productivity for those last few hours?
That's what it suggests, doesn't it? It points towards peak productivity perhaps being achieved Not by just grinding out more hours, but by strategically creating space for rest and recovery that allows for more focused, higher quality work, but in fewer hours.
Interesting.
And it's not just the UK pilot. Look at the Iceland national trials. They ran between 2015 and 2019. Around 2,500 workers cut their hours from roughly 40 down to 35.
Okay.
And the outcome, it was described as dramatically increased well-being, lower stress, and again, productivity that was either the same or in some cases even higher.
So it's repeatable,
Yeah.
it seems, not just a one-off.
The pattern appears consistent. And it's not just these big trials either. Our sources point out that now more than 80 UK organizations, we're talking banks, manufacturers, even local councils, have permanently shifted to less than 35-hour weeks.
Yeah.
And they're reporting positive outcomes.
Right, which makes the current situation seem even stranger.
Yeah.
Our sources mention this paradox. UK workers now average only, 23 hours of real free time a week?
That's the figure, yeah.
Despite all this increased AI and tech supposedly making things more efficient in the workplace, it feels like the technology hasn't actually given us our time back. Maybe the opposite.
That seems to be the reality we're living, yes.
Okay, so the evidence from the trials is incredibly compelling. We know long hours are bad, shorter weeks can work, but the big question is implementation, right? How would you actually roll out such a fundamental shift on a larger scale, maybe even nationally? Our deep dive into the sources, well, it revealed a pretty detailed government-led proposal for exactly that.
Yes, the proposal outlines 4 key steps, and they're quite interconnected. Step 1 is what they call AI productivity audits.
Okay, what does that involve?
Basically, companies would conduct audits guided by the government to figure out exactly where AI and automation can safely and ethically take over certain tasks.
Okay.
But crucially, the goal isn't redundancy. It's about ensuring this happens without leading to layoffs. The aim is freeing up human time, not eliminating human jobs necessarily.
Got it. So find the time savings first. What's next?
Step 2 is perhaps the most critical. Share the productivity gains. This is non-negotiable in the proposal. Any time saved by AI must directly translate into shorter contracts for employees for the same pay and with absolutely no penalties for working reduced hours.
So the benefit goes straight to the worker's schedule, not just the company's bottom line.
Precisely. It really highlights how policy design is key here, making sure tech advances benefit the workforce directly.
Makes sense. What's step 3?
Step 3 is about support and incentivizing the transition. Businesses wouldn't just be told to do this, they'd get help. Things like tax credits, subsidies for training staff, maybe access to shared automation tools, especially for smaller companies.
Right, practical help to make the switch feasible.
Exactly. And then finally, step 4 is about data, flexibility, and oversight. This means companies have to report on things like working hours, employee well-being, staff turnover, the impact of AI.
So tracking if it's actually working as intended.
Yes. And it also includes designing tailored approaches for tricky sectors. Critical services like healthcare or emergency response. They'd need specific solutions like maybe shift swaps, shared on-call rosters, or clever blends of automation and human workers.
That's a very comprehensive roadmap. My first thought, though, and I bet many listeners are thinking this too, what about the cost? Is this just too expensive, especially for smaller businesses? Does it sound good on paper but fall apart economically?
That's a really important question, and the sources definitely acknowledge the short-term challenges. There's no denying it.
Yep.
Integrating new AI, maybe needing to hire some additional staff to cover the gaps created by shorter hours, that can increase costs up front, particularly for SMEs, the smaller and medium-sized businesses.
Right.
And certain industries, you mentioned emergency services, hospitality is another one, they would definitely need to do some significant redesigning of shifts and staffing models. That takes effort and potentially investment.
So there are real initial hurdles. But reading through the material, it seems the argument is that these short-term costs are outweighed by longer-term gains. Is that fair?
That's exactly the argument presented. While the immediate costs are a valid concern, the long-term economic benefits outlined in the source material are genuinely compelling. They suggest these initial challenges are, well, very much worth overcoming.
Okay, so what are those big long-term gains?
Well, first off, remember those massive costs from sick leave and stress we talked about?
Yeah, the 28 billion pound figure.
Exactly. The source is project savings of somewhere between 21.6 and 28 billion per year just from reduced sick leave and absenteeism. Fewer burned out people means fewer days off.
That's a huge saving for the economy and presumably for businesses too.
Absolutely. Then think about retention. Remember that 57% drop in turnover in the UK pilot.
Right.
Higher retention means companies keep experienced staff longer. That reduces the constant, expensive churn of hiring and training new people.
Okay, that makes sense. Less disruption.
Plus, is a predicted boost to the wider consumer economy. If people have more genuine free time.
They spend more on leisure, travel, hobbies.
Exactly. Leisure, fitness, travel, cultural sectors, they all stand to benefit significantly. And, crucially, let's not forget productivity. Based on the trials, the expectation is that overall productivity remains stable or might even slightly improve.
So it's not just about employee well-being, although that's huge. The argument is it makes good economic sense too.
Yes. It's presented as a win-win. A healthier, happier workforce leading to a more efficient, dynamic, and ultimately stable autonomy.
Of course, any policy this big is going to face pushback, questions, potential hurdles. You mentioned SMEs, shift work.
Yeah.
How do the sources suggest tackling those specific challenges?
They do address them quite proactively, yeah. For the cost issue for SMEs, the proposal includes things like automation grants, maybe access to shared AI resources, cooperative models where smaller firms pool resources. Basically, direct financial and practical help.
Okay.
For those tricky shift-based sectors, the solutions mentioned include things like more sophisticated rotational schedules, using AI perhaps for triage or support tasks to free up human capacity, and maybe developing surge staffing pools for peak times.
So tailored operational solutions.
Right. Then there's worker training. If tasks change, skills need updating. The proposal suggests funding this through a specific automation productivity tax. So the gains from automation help pay for the upskilling needed.
Interesting. What about wages, making sure people aren't sneakily paid less for fewer hours?
That's covered under wage equity. It would be legally mandated, no pay cuts for reduced hours, and this would be enforced through proper labor inspection.
Okay. Strong enforcement needed there.
Definitely. And finally, to stop some sectors lagging behind or opting out the issue of uneven adoption, the plan suggests rolling it out sector by sector, requiring compliance and transparent data reporting from everyone within that sector.
So trying to ensure a level playing field as it rolls out.
Exactly, which, raises that important broader question. How do we make sure the benefits of such a massive transformation are shared fairly across all of society? That's a key challenge in the design.
Okay, so after diving deep into all this evidence, the trials, the proposals, the challenges, what are the main takeaways? If someone asks, why isn't this just a nice idea, a pipe dream? What are the strongest arguments our sources leave us with?
I think our sources boil it down to 4 really powerful reasons why this vision isn't just possible, but maybe even crucial. First, simply put, the evidence is already there.
The trials we discussed.
Exactly. They aren't just theories. They're real-world demos showing this concept actually works. People are healthier, happier, and just as productive, if not more so.
Okay, reason 1, it works in practice.
Second, the technology is ready. AI can free up human hours. The question isn't if technology can do it, it's how we choose to use those freed up hours. It's presented as a policy choice, not some unavoidable consequence of automation leading to job losses.
Right. We decide the outcome.
Third, the potential health and economic payoffs are just massive. We're talking reduced pressure on healthcare systems like the NHS, huge improvements in individual well-being, and more stable, potentially more innovative businesses.
Health, wealth, and well-being.
Pretty much. And fourth, and this is perhaps more profound, it represents a fundamental cultural shift. It's about demanding time, real free time, as a universal good. Not just a luxury for a few privileged people, but something everyone deserves.
So it's practical, technologically feasible, economically beneficial, and maybe even morally necessary.
That's the core argument being made, yes.
It really does feel like this isn't just some, utopian dream anymore. Our sources argue it's a policy with real legs, a concrete path forward that seems genuinely within our reach.
And I think the underlying philosophy is powerful too. When we deliberately channel AI towards human flourishing, towards well-being, we don't just transform work. The argument is we actually start to redeem life itself.
That's a strong way to put it.
Yeah.
Our sources leave us with a really powerful thought, something for all of you listening to maybe mull over long after this deep dive ends. The purpose of life isn't more work, it's more living. And this idea with smart design, time isn't the enemy of productivity, it is the productivity. Maybe just think about how this vision, this fundamental rethinking of how we work and live, could reshape your own life, your community, and maybe our whole society.